Welcome to the Recover You podcast. I'm Kylene.
And I'm Patrick.
We are a couple in recovery
From sex addiction
and betrayal trauma. Together, we share our story to encourage you on your journey. It's here that we talk about sex addiction, betrayal trauma, mental, emotional, and physical health, faith, and anything and everything needed to recover you to your most authentic self that God created you to be. Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Recover You. Patrick's back.
I'm back.
Hi, Patrick.
Hello, Kylene.
So last week's episode was on 5 reasons sex and intimacy can be difficult creating or reestablishing, and the benefits of intimacy. And today we're going to go through together 4 questions to deepen intimacy. So I sort of alluded to that in last week's episode, that we would give you some actual questions to discuss with each other to kind of begin going down this path. But Patrick was not with me on that episode. So any thoughts that you wanted to share around that topic?
Yeah, intimacy is hard. It's really, really hard. And, they talk about sex addiction being an intimacy disorder. And it's in a very vulnerable space. You were talking last week about the different levels of intimacy. There's, of course, physical intimacy, there's spiritual intimacy, there's emotional intimacy. And we really don't want to be seen because we're afraid of what people will actually think about us. So if you ask an open-ended, we talked about asking open-ended questions. If you ask an open-ended question, you may get an open-ended answer, and that can be very uncomfortable because it may tug at something. So intimacy is just really, really hard. And I think, sometimes you see in relationships, people will just continue to sweep things under the rug and won't do the hard work to get to a point where we are. I think about the conversations that we have sometimes and the things you may say at times. And I think about how I would have maybe received it 4 years ago, right? Before I was discovered, right? When I was deep in my addiction and deep in my disorder. And so I think as you move through recovery, you're better able to receive hard conversations or be involved in hard conversations because you're a little bit more secure in who you are and what you mean in the relationship, right? And you only really understand that by having open conversations and kind of getting to where in clarifying things and not answering like, yeah, I'm fine. You really got to go through. I think I was telling somebody this week that I think it was Saturday, we're out for a walk. I was like, man, I'm feeling a little bit of anxiety. Remember that? We were out walking around. I was like, I would have never said that 4 years ago. I would have never even said it. I probably wouldn't have. I would have just absorbed it deeply.
Right.
And
that gave me the opportunity to ask you about it and to check on it a couple times after that to see where it was.
Chased me around the house with a bottle of GABA.
I did not. I did mention you could take that.
Take it. No. So yeah, it's but when you can show up in a intimate way, whatever level you're working on, and allow your guard to come down. I actually was in therapy today, and I made this comment, because we've talked about it on the podcast, that we have worked very hard to connect again on the sexual, physical intimacy level, right? It's been a very, very hard thing to do. And it wasn't all you. A lot of it was I was doing my very best to lead with safety, to make sure you felt safe. But I liken that to the riot police entering a room with a shield up the whole time. That's how I was approaching physical intimacy, right? Because not only was I trying to provide space for you, I was protecting myself too. So it took a long time for me to lower that riot gear shield, and allow myself to step into that space and say, hey, it's going to be okay. It's, if you the other thing too is we had so many reps of moments where we had to pause, or moments where you got sad or I got sad or whatever. And then you look back and you go, we didn't die. We actually made it through that particular experience. So I think but it wasn't easy. It wasn't easy to get there. And there was a lot of work that went into it, but it's really worth it when you can be in a relationship where you know that your partner is going to show up and be completely honest and vulnerable with you in the moment. And you're actually okay. You're actually okay with it.
Yeah. I think, you kind of hit on a bunch of different things there, but, that whole process was very vulnerable. We created a lot of safety around it. And then I guess the question, because this whole first chunk is it's hard. It's kind of what we were just saying. So, but you mentioned it is worth it. So like, what do you think coming, and it's not always linear, right? But like coming through it and, what do you feel like is the benefit on the other side of that?
Actually, I was thinking that as you were asking that question, every deepest, darkest thing about me, right? And so do 2.5 million people.
No, that's not true.
That's not true. But you know that about me, and both that. But you still pursue me. You still say, "I really, really love you." You say, like when we were having. It wasn't a hard conversation last Thursday night, but you were like, "Hey, I want you to know that I really, really want to be with you, and I really love you." Like and in an addict's mind, it's hard to bring those two together because what you've lived in for so long is that you're bad, your behavior's bad, and once people find out what you are, there's no hope for you, and you're going to be rejected.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
That's the fear you've lived in forever. Yeah.
Decades, right? You live in that for decades. And then you go through a process, and in 3.5 years, which is, for all you non-math people, is less than decades. You're at that point where somebody sees you in that way, and especially the person you hurt the most, and still, views you as somebody they want to be around.
Yeah.
I mean, it's almost indescribable, how you can bring those two together. But I think that's really the major facet of healing, is how you can start to bring those two realities together. And it starts out, a day after discovery, they're miles apart, right? And then it just gets closer and closer. And if you keep doing the work, then you're able to achieve that.
I think part of the only way that ended up happening, though, was also you seeing me from the beginning as well.
Mm-hmm.
So while you were working on recovery, you were very actively practicing, seeing me and holding space for me. And so to get to the point where through the past 3.5 years, I can say the same thing, that you probably know pretty much everything about me too, and we have really hard conversations and we just do them now.
Yeah,
we just have them now. Right.
Yeah.
And, but that's because we know we're on the same team, and we know, there's a level of trust there. Right. And safety. We use that word so much, but I think that I just don't think that these types of conversations are possible without that. So to that end, stepping into the 4 questions that I'm going to recommend people maybe do, if this type of conversation is new for you, maybe you have it. Maybe you have this type of conversation all the time. It's just not as structured as I'm going to suggest in this episode, and that's fine. But if it's new to you, or you don't typically go this deeply with each other, it might be worth having a conversation, kind of setting some structure around this before you even ask the questions. And so that might be like, hey, when you are talking, I am just going to listen. I'm not going to interrupt. And then I can respond, right? Unless you guys have a pattern of dialoguing very, very well together, and maybe that doesn't need to be said. But if there are every couple has different patterns, right? So if there is a pattern of let me listen to respond instead of listening to understand, or I know when we started podcasting, I was like, oh my gosh, I have to be super, super, super hyper aware of interrupting, because it may be, I can really step on top of your sentences. And so I have to be careful about doing that, And so, whatever patterns are in the coupleship that might hinder vulnerability or this conversation being effective and getting the desired result, which is more connection, just maybe note those ahead of time and create some safety around that, right? Like, how do we want this conversation to go? But also, some of these questions might be really difficult to answer. And so just kind of be aware, like, how can we set this up to be a really, really safe conversation? What's the goal of this? Hopefully it is to connect more deeply and to kind of get an idea of how you can support each other as you move further along. So I'm just going to read the 4 questions first, and then Patrick and I are going to walk through an example of having this conversation, and we're just going to answer these questions for each other. We'll shorten it just a little bit for the sake of time, but we'll actually have this conversation together just as an example of how it might go. So the 4 questions that I'm going to recommend that you can go through are: what are your top 3 fears, insecurities, or pain points in our relationships? So an example might be, I'm afraid that I won't live up to your expectations in some way. Or another example might be, I'm afraid to be vulnerable. It feels very, very scary. Or if there's a big insecurity that you have, I'm afraid you might leave me, or, whatever the pain point is, you want to share those. Question number 2 is, are there responses, patterns, or ways that I respond that make it difficult for you to feel safe or to be vulnerable? And then the third one is, how can we create safety to be vulnerable in our conversations together? How could I work on communication in the future to help lay the foundation of safety? And then the 4th question is, what would help you feel more emotionally connected to me? So those are the 4 questions. Who wants to go first?
You should go first. I might have to see them.
You want to?
Yeah, I can't memorize them. Okay.
I text them too. Okay. You're saying you want to ask the questions first, or you want to answer the questions first?
I will answer the question.
Oh, okay. All right. So we're going to make this a little shorter by saying, for the first question, we'll just pick one instead of your top 3. So do you have a fear, insecurity, or pain point in our relationship?
I do. I think one of my big fears has been that we will both do all of this work, become very, very connected again, and then it won't work for us. I think that's probably like that would make me really, really sad. It wouldn't divert me away from my healing, but that would make me really, really sad that we weren't able to make it. So I think that is a fear at times that could be a reality.
Mm-hmm. Are there responses, patterns, or ways that I respond that make it difficult for you to feel safe to be vulnerable, like to share those fears? Or are there ways I respond sometimes that make you not want to bring things up?
No, I think when you're feeling off, and I think sometimes I do feel like I'm allowed to bring things up, but I think sometimes we get a little surprised, or I get a little surprised by how you're feeling in a particular moment. And so I think I don't know what you could do differently, because that doesn't impact my ability to bring something up, because I think when it comes up, then I talk about it. So I actually think you hold space very well with that. I think the one time you got mad at me and told me that I wasn't supposed to feel that way. But then you apologized. You're like, no, you're allowed to have that.
Yeah, I was really mad.
Yeah.
And I said, I know you're allowed to have feelings too, or something like that.
Yeah.
I know your feelings are valid too, but I was really upset that night, as we were kind of processing something. How is there a way that we can create safety to be vulnerable like more in our conversations, or is there a way I could work on communication in the future to make things feel more safe? You sort of just answered, I guess, but is there anything that comes to
Yeah,
mind?
I don't know. I mean, it may not happen this way in your brain, but I think when you're feeling a little off or
Mhm.
whatever, bring it up sooner. But your brain may not work that way. There may not be an opportunity to bring it up
Mm.
sooner. Because then I think we can connect a little bit. Like I think about our vacation in Curacao. Like I didn't recognize that you were feeling a little off. So
Yeah.
I think in something like that, and we talked about this, like, maybe because it was a new environment with some possible, stumbles
Mhm.
or whatever, we should have,
Triggers, you mean?
yeah, we should have had maybe a check-in.
Triggers for me, let's be
Triggers for
specific.
you. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And maybe we should have had a check-in, a couple check-ins established or something like that.
So coming to you earlier, yeah, I think I'm thinking about that because I'm thinking, is there an earlier time where my brain knows how to
Right.
what's
Yeah,
actually
that's
happening?
always the challenge.
Because sometimes there's stuff like it's almost like it's rumbling under the
Yeah.
surface. It gets to a certain point, and then you're like, okay, I have to communicate this, and now I know how to.
Yeah.
But no, that's a valid point. But I think that goes into can we be more aware regularly of how we're feeling and why?
Right.
And if you can identify it earlier is always going to be better.
Yeah.
Okay. What would help you feel more emotionally connected to me?
That's a good question because I feel pretty connected. Um, I don't know. That's a hard one to answer because I think you've done a really nice job of doing that. Um, so I'll be honest, I cannot think of anything right now that would make me feel even more connected.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I feel like I got an A+ on this one. No.
Yeah.
Okay, so well, just to that end though, is there anything outside of these questions that I just asked then that you feel like could help us continue to improve the relationship?
I think outside of these questions,
Just anything that you think would be like a goal that you want to keep working towards or something that
you could say yes when I asked you if you want to go to Army Navy game next year in
Oh.
Baltimore.
Okay, well, if it involves sports, then you might be SOL.
No, I don't think so. I think, had we done this series of questions, 2.5 years ago,
Yeah.
it would have been interesting. So,
Yeah,
okay.
for sure. This would have been interesting even a year ago.
Yeah, right. Okay. What are your top 3 fears, insecurities, pain points in our relationship?
So I'll just pick one.
Okay. You've got 7.
No, you said that we're just doing one for time purposes. Okay, so well, you sort of when you said yours, which is like, hey, what if we do all this work and then we hit a point in like 10 years or something and it's for whatever reason it's just not clicking,
Mhm.
right? And we decide like, hey, we really like each other, but that's definitely one. But since you said that, maybe I'll pick a different one. But that's definitely like, especially, I mean,
Mhm.
being super vulnerable, like even
Yeah.
sharing this openly with everybody is
Mhm.
like, we have this podcast and we work with people and everything. So there is a little bit of like when I feel like things are off a little bit, I also feel that pressure. It's like a separate, like it's like an addition to.
Right.
So there's that, and that is like a scary thought. I mean, yeah, that is definitely like a fear, right?
Mhm.
But since you said that, and I agree with you, I think maybe let me think about this. I don't know. I think that's really the big one. But then maybe there might be one too where I'll say vulnerability would be, or insecurity would be sometimes, and I don't know if this is like a really big one anymore, but sometimes it'll come up where I say like, hey, is there something that like that you did like in that world, or that you wish was different about me, or that or I don't know, like kind of along those lines of comparison, like it, or if I don't feel pretty, or those things kind of periodically that was the comparison was a really hard wound for me for a really long time. And so I think maybe there's something there still, occasionally.
Yeah.
But I actually think in the past 6 months to a year, the more deeply we've gone with like being really, really honest about our fears, and being super clear about, I'm really glad we've gotten this far, but we want to keep going forward kind of conversations. And especially recently, like, we get closer and things like that. I think the more confident we feel in the relationship, a lot of those types of things diminish.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Like the deeper the healing is, the deeper the vulnerability is, the more the connection is there, kind of thing.
It's always interesting in that, because it's like the chicken or the egg. It's like, is it because I approach you in a way that helps, and then you lower your guard, or is it because you've lowered your guard and you can feel me approaching you in a way? It's like, it's not always easy to spot that. But
I'm trying to figure out too, you and I have talked about this, but I'm trying to figure out too, like how much of this goes into, just recovery work versus like the way my brain works because of ADD. And sometimes like when things come up, I'm trying to figure out like what falls into what category sometimes. Cause you've kind of heard me processing all of that the past couple months, trying to figure out all that stuff. And then I get frustrated with myself. Right. So, anyway, so not to get too off track here with that question.
Are there responses, patterns, ways I respond that make it difficult for you to feel safe or to be vulnerable?
In terms of regularly, I don't think so. I think that, like you mentioned earlier, I think the reason I can say the hard things is because I know that it is safe to do so. There's only been a couple times where, like, if you get really angry, like if you raise your voice, like that's like crazy, because that never happens. And so that's like, I'm not gonna lie, it's kind of scary.
I don't want to scare you.
No, because you never do it. Like, I'm not scared that like anything, it's like, whoa, like it's so, if you raise your voice ever, it's just so outside of your regular personality, right? And so like that never happens, so it's not really a thing, right? So generally speaking, no, I think those are the only things that would be like, whoa, that's a little intimidating, right? Like it's intimidating. Or like any sort of like aloofness, right? But I think most of the time you're so engaged and so present, at least now the way we interact, that no, I don't think there's anything like in terms of general patterns, I don't think there's anything in terms of providing that. If like you being mad in response to, if I was bringing something up to you that was like a vulnerability and you dismissed it or got really mad about it, I think that would be really hard. But you don't, which is why I'm able to really bring that. Although, actually, I just brought something up. Actually, I think sometimes, and this isn't bad on you, it's just the reality, is if one partner brings up something that's hard and then the other partner goes, well, that kind of makes me feel insecure.
Yeah.
So that's not bad. It doesn't make it unsafe to bring that up, because both of you need to share, like both of us have to be honest about that, right?
I know one of the things I'll say when you bring something up and it's vulnerable about me or whatever.
Yeah.
And then you're like, I'm sorry that I brought that. I'm always like, it is what it is. I don't say that to be snarky, but it's like, hey, it's how you feel.
Well, and I think that goes into like, if I say something that's what I'm struggling with currently, and it kind of hurts your feelings, you also have the right to be like, hey, that hurts my feelings, right? but you're still providing that space for me to, because the only way you're going to work through it is if we talk about it. And we've kind of talked about that over time and gotten better, I think, about doing that. But it doesn't make the conversations more easy.
I always feel like saying, and I do say this, is like, well, it's unpleasant to hear it, but it's okay for you to express it. I know I say that.
Yeah.
At times.
And I just want to like clarify that you like never yell. So if people made that comment and people are like, no, you literally like never.
I mean, maybe once every 3 to 6 hours. Something like that.
No, the personality you get on the podcast is his actual personality. It's pretty chill.
Cool.
And we all have our moments. I certainly do.
How can we create safety to be vulnerable in our conversations together? How could I work on communication in the future to help lay the foundation of safety?
I think you do it, but I think what we just talked about, right? Like you are curious about what's in my head. Maybe not as much as I'm curious about what's in your head, but you are curious.
Get out of my head.
It is reciprocal, right? So I think that's required for this. So we have to be interested in how the other person works, and we have to like them enough and care enough to like learn about that, right? And then I think you really, the only times I have felt super off, like, have been times where I feel like we're not on the same page. And that's where things are kind of like what do you call it? Where it's like things are not connecting right and there's like the sparks are flying kind of deal. It's like you're not really connecting on the right. There's like a deep misunderstanding of some sort. But if I feel like when we know that we're on the same page and we know that even if it's really, really hard, and even if it means something scary, that we want the best for the other person, and we're and the best for ourselves and the other person, and we want health. I think approaching it from that place has provided so much safety.
Yeah.
So then I know that that's where you're coming from. We've had enough conversations that like I know that's where you're coming from, and you know that's where I'm coming from. And we've talked about that in regards to your fear too, right? Like of at this point we can't imagine that like I feel like if we ever did separate, it'd be like the most friendly, amicable. Like I can't imagine a situation where it's like, you're just such a nice person.
But then it'd be like, why'd we separate?
Right, exactly. Yeah. Exactly. So I think we're fine.
What would help you feel more emotionally connected to me?
That for me, actually, I don't think there's anything you can do. I think this is a recent realization. I don't know, recent realization or conviction might not be the right word, but that's something that for me on the betrayed side, feeling emotionally connected requires a lot of trust and safety and vulnerability, right? And so like that was I mentioned there was a specific moment in the first 6 months or whatever where that like I felt that energetic cord was like really, really disconnected. So for me, what's been really kind of hard is reestablishing that energetic connection and having it be a consistent cord. So I don't think that's you. I think time has played a good bit in the trust and everything we talked about. But what I realized recently, I was like, okay, I actually on my side have to open that pathway for the energy from me to connect to you, but also to receive the energy that you're sending to me. And so that's more of like almost like a decision on my part. That sounds very conscious, but it's more, this can sound super woo, but it's very much like being energetically open to that connection, like my heart center.
We've talked about this before, through the recovery when you would be like, And I know early on you'd be like, why don't you do this? Why don't you do that? You know, like pursue me. Why don't you? And for the longest time, and I'm sure it was true, you know, like it was almost probably like a sliding scale. Early on, I probably wasn't doing any of those things, but then I started. And I think I kind of, to your point, I had said something a while ago that like sometimes people are wounded and they can't recognize it. Like the effort is being made, but because they're wounded or whatever, they can't recognize the effort. So somebody is flirting, somebody is reaching out, somebody is, you know, doing things to create emotional connection, and the door is closed, to your point.
Well, I think that, it's a combination, right? So I think you mentioned earlier through your healing process, there was an energy stop for you as well, because you weren't feeling totally confident.
Right.
Your confidence took a huge hit because you basically felt like any wrong move, right, for a long time could be disastrous. Right. And so that really was difficult for you to gain confidence. And that energy shows up in the relationship. You know, lack of confidence shows up in the relationship and how you connect with each other. And then I would have the walls up to protect, right? And so then I might not receive the effort that you would give, or I might notice it on one level, but maybe not receive it on another level. So yeah, I think it could definitely be a combination. I think we've both grown a lot in both of those areas year over year. You know, and I think it's one of those things where the first year and a half to 2 years, even the ball is rolling, but it's like rolling so slowly.
Yeah.
And then I think after that it can go, you know, kind of faster. But that's
I would just remember being like, gosh, why don't I, you know, you'd be like, I want you to, you know, pursue me and be bold. And I'm like, what's wrong with me? You know, like, why can't I do that? And then, you know, like I'd feel okay. Cause I get into isolate mode a little bit too. Like, okay, it's after 9 o'clock, it's time to go to bed. And that could have been an opportunity, right, to create some deeper intimacy, but I'm already in going to sleep mode. And then I feel bad because I'm like, oh, I missed that, you know? So it's like, it is an interesting, and then you beat yourself up, right? So then you get into that and you go, well, there must be something really wrong with me that I can't seem to recognize this, or can't seem to, you know, to kind of move. So then that just makes it worse. And that's, you know,
don't worry, if something's going on, Patrick, I'll bring it up.
I know. So yeah, I mean, I think that's all part of healing, is like, you know, the addict is approaching it from a, you know, I'm a messed up person. And so anything that happens,
right,
you know, it's like, I'm a messed up person. Somebody gets a cold in the house. Well, it's probably because of me and my addiction. You know what I mean? Like you really, you know, unduly take on everything, you know, and then over time you learn that no, things still happen. You know, people still get sick. You know,
I think, I mean, I'm on my side, and I guess I'll shift into speaking maybe more universally for the betrayed partner too, is there comes a point in healing way after safety is provided, where in order to move forward, you have to be willing to do the self-reflection so that you can begin to separate what you just said, which is what is still associated with betrayal and what's just life,
right,
but also doing the reflection of what is really my healing still left to do versus quote unquote your fault, right? Or your responsibility even. So that, and it does move where we're at now. It's I feel like it's less and less and less about betrayal and less about trauma and less and less and less about addiction. It's so much more now just about like, how do we deepen connection? How do we improve our relationship? How do we grow as people, right? Like for me, like how do I get my brain to work the way I want it, and how do I or most effectively, and how do I have energy throughout the day, right? And for you, it's, I don't know, what are you like, time management, and like you have so many plates going. It's like, how do I balance different light? Like,
well, I think for me, it's like, how do I remain deeply aware? How do I maintain the system of identifying my own fears and feelings on a daily basis? Because that's what addicts don't do, is they don't identify their own stuff. So if I can do that on a daily basis and be very successful at it,
Yeah.
then I stay in recovery.
Your answer was way deeper than mine.
Was it?
I was like, I'm managing my energy. You're like, I'm managing my emotions, Kylene. I'm becoming more self-aware every day.
Yeah.
Tomorrow I will be enlightened.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And I will write a play.
No, anyway, so that was actually, I was just asked you because like these answers weren't like scripted or prepared. Do you feel like that was a helpful conversation?
I do. And I think, we maybe the audience will be like, oh, that doesn't sound that hard because you guys have worked on stuff, and we really have, but we've had versions of these through time. And we had like there was a little bit of a minor incident last week that we had to walk through. And
it was just a conversation,
yeah,
but
and
it was like,
right.
hey,
The question I had was, hey, well, how would you like me to do that differently next time? And that was important. It's important learning, because you don't get everything right. You don't you can't have a plan for every situation that's gonna come about. And so it's always really important as a human to recognize that you're going to make mistakes, and it's okay to come back and go, hey, how are you feeling right there? What could I have done differently? How can I show up for you better? Because we all go through seasons of life. We all get sick parents, or we all get whatever, and it takes you off your game. We were very lucky in our recovery process, and this isn't the case for every couple, but we had a kid who was a junior in high school, so he had his own thing going on that allowed us the space,
evenings to talk through things,
but not everybody has that luxury, so you're going to have to try to find a way to continue to connect in that way. And then when he went off to college, we had the opportunity to really spend a lot of time. We were empty nesters at that point, and so not everybody has that luxury. Some of you have little kids running around, and some folks have long distance relationships that, there's a lot of challenges out there, but we also had our challenges. And so I think the point is what you're making with these 4 questions is these are really, really good questions to ask. And if you're finding yourself getting angry when you're asked these questions, then there's something going on there. You know what I mean? Because you should just be able to act. Let me state it this way, because I don't want to shame anybody. If you find yourself getting angry over the question, it's a good point to self-reflect and say, hey, what's going on inside of me that would force some anger there? Is it, what I mean? What is that?
I always say a trigger is just a reflection of an unhealed wound. So when unwanted or what we might consider negative emotions arise, we just want to check in, like why is that showing up? And so what you were just saying is that's a defense mechanism. So if questions about vulnerability are coming up, or deepening intimacy or whatever, and now I already clarified this in last week's episode, but in case someone skipped last week's episode and they're just listening to this is not a conversation for week 1. This is probably not a conversation for the first 1 to 6 months, or even the first year. This is like way after those mile markers of like, you're not worried about relapse every day. You're not having intense stress. You're not navigating like the basic stability of your relationship. This is like the phase where you're digging more deeply into reconnection or connecting for the first time in some ways. So a little bit of a different, just a clarification there.
Well, and the other thing too, what these questions do is people aren't good at this. And so, you know what I mean? And humans aren't good at this, because if humans were good at this, then there probably wouldn't be wars. Probably wouldn't be therapists. There wouldn't be any of that, right? If we were good at this. So you got to keep in mind that you're learning, and these questions help. And you may ask this question one night and get an answer you don't like or have no answer. You may ask this question again in a week, and it actually starts to formulate an answer. So, because that's how we are as human beings, we're a learning species until we die. And so, this is the joy of these kinds of exercises, is it allows you to move forward. You always want to lean forward in your healing. You don't want to lean back. You want to lean forward, and these processes can help you do that.
Yeah. All right. Well, in terms of, let's say, where we were a year ago
Mhm.
versus where we are today, how do you think these conversations have changed that or improved that? Or
Well, I just know myself, and I don't, I can't attribute your emotion or value to what you were saying. But what I can tell you is, I remember there being a lot of like, the way I used to be was like, oh boy, here we go. Like we're going to talk about something, you know what I mean? Like, I don't really want to talk about I just kind of want to do whatever. And so now it's like, it's okay. And I think partially because the fear of the unknown, like the fear we brought up at the very beginning.
Yeah.
A year and a half ago, talking about not making it seems more of a reality than it does today. So when you know what I mean? Like, you know what I mean? It's a little bit more, you're more afraid of that a year and a half ago because you're like, man, there's still some hard things going on, you know what I mean? And stuff like that. So I think I feel like my emotion, my nervous system is so much less activated on these things.
Oh man, yeah.
Yeah.
That's a really good point.
Yeah. When we were talking Thursday night and you were kind of concerned, you're like, hey, I'm not,
That conversation that we had last week was so chill on both sides.
That's right. I was like, okay, I'm all right. I'm like, I'm really okay.
Like checking in with each other.
Yeah, I'm okay. You're allowed to say what you want to say. You know what I mean? Until a feeling turns into action or whatever that could be detrimental.
No, but like I don't think either.
No,
but like either one of us wasn't really upset by the conversation. So anyway, I think we've said the conversation enough that at some point we should probably just share what happened, but maybe not for this episode. But no, it's just that something came up and we just talked about it. Like it wasn't a thing. And it was real smooth. And so, but you brought the nervousness. And I think that's, if you want specifics, which is always good to share, is like, how do these conversations, why would you be willing to have conversations that are this hard, that are this vulnerable? Why do you go through? Because when you move through them together and you create the safety helps your nervous system calm down. Safety helps you to feel seen. It creates that intimacy. It creates that connection. It helps you feel more, like, would you say you feel more connected in general this year than last year?
Absolutely.
And I texted you the other day. I'm like, I'm feeling more connected and grounded and, different things or whatever. And so, yeah, I think when I think about the relationship I have with you, I don't know that there's anyone else in the world that knows as much about me. You know what I mean? Kind of what you said earlier.
Yeah.
And the level of time and effort I think it's taken us to get here. I mean, even if we got here, like without, like we wouldn't have, because we wouldn't have been prompted to, but had betrayal and discovery and all this had not happened to get here, it would have taken time and a lot of effort.
Absolutely.
And so I think that is something I think to even mention, is that this problem isn't just unique to people that are recovering from addiction, and this is just a human problem. It's communication. It's being willing to do the hard thing. It's stepping out of your comfort zone. It's opening up to somebody else and saying, this is the part that I think I'm scared, like you might hurt this part, but I'm going to share it with you. Right. I'm really scared to talk about this. And I think the thing I would kind of like to leave at the end of this episode is, things unspoken are a rock in your shoe that will stay there forever.
Right.
And you can gather add another thing, you're adding another rock to the shoe, and you're just going to walk through your relationship with rocks in your shoes. Right. As opposed to like, well, let me maybe talk about this and then I can empty the shoe out.
Right.
And then we can, if you think about it, like
put it back on and start moving.
Yeah. If you feel very, very literally about that, it's like, yeah, you said you can walk forward again and maybe your foot begins to heal because, you've removed that, and it provides a lot of safety, a lot of healing in the relationship. So cool. Thanks for having this conversation with me.
Absolutely.
And answering those questions. And I hope this has been helpful. We will see you all next week. Woohoo! If you're listening to this, it means you've made it through an entire episode. Part of recovery is spending time engaging in healing and self-growth activities. We are thankful that you chose our podcast to be one of those activities today. Make sure you reward yourself for that accomplishment. If you've enjoyed this episode or this podcast, we would love to hear from you. Please take just a few moments to leave a rating and review, letting us know your experience with Recover You. We not only love hearing how these episodes are helpful, but ratings and reviews help others just like you who are searching for recovery information and support find the podcast too. We can't wait to hear from you. See you next week.